This is your 420 Radio News for Wednesday, January 22nd, 2014, brought to you by National Cannabis Coalition at nationalcannabiscoalition.com. I'm Russ Belville. President Obama lit up the marijuana reform movement this weekend when he told the New Yorker magazine that, quote, "I don't think marijuana is more dangerous than alcohol," end quote. This puts the president in agreement with 74% of the American people who told CNN the same thing. He also told interviewer David Remnick, quote, "As has been well documented, I smoked pot as a kid, and I view it as a bad habit and a vice, not very different from the cigarettes that I smoked as a young person up through a big chunk of my adult life." Obama also said, quote, "It's important for legalization in Washington and Colorado to go forward because it's important for society not to have a situation in which a large portion of people have at one time or another broken the law and only a select few get punished," end quote. President Obama did worry about the slippery slope of legalization, wondering, quote, "If somebody says we've got a finely calibrated dose of meth, it isn't going to kill you or rot your teeth, are we okay with that?" end quote. The CNN poll showed only 4% of Americans would support legal meth. Medical marijuana patients may be forced to choose their medicine or their gun. Under proposed rules for the Illinois medical marijuana program, a patient or caregiver may not possess a weapon, even if they have a state firearm identification card or even a concealed carry permit. Oddly, the state lobbyist for the National Rifle Association says the NRA takes no position on the issue of denying Second Amendment rights to sick people who use cannabis. Though the organization has taken positions fighting for the rights of blind people to hunt wild game and opposing closing the loopholes in background checks that allow felons and the mentally ill to buy at gun shows from private sellers. Other proposed regs include background checks for patients and caregivers that would exclude those convicted of violent felonies and drug felonies from using cannabis as medicine. There is no word from the NRA on their position on these background checks preventing felons from getting medical pot. Supporters of marijuana legalization in Georgia gathered at the state capitol in Atlanta to deliver a press conference announcing 62% support for decriminalization. Sharon Ravert, head of Peachtree NORML, explained how their phone survey showed majority support among Georgians for not treating marijuana use with arrest and incarceration, but that currently the group favors political action on the issue of medical marijuana. Republican State Senator Josh McCoon has proposed a committee to study medical marijuana legislation, and Republican State Representative Alan Peake will propose a bill that legalizes the CBD-only form of medical marijuana known as Alephsia that has shown remarkable effect for children with epilepsy. Representative Peake was moved to act by the case of Haley Cox, a 4-year-old who suffers 100 seizures a day, and he believes Georgia's dormant 1980 medical marijuana law can be reactivated to include seizure disorders. Over 1,300 Louisiana residents are serving an average of 8.4 years in prison for simple marijuana possession, according to figures from the state's Department of Corrections revealed in a meeting of the House Committee on the Administration of Criminal Justice. 41 prisoners are serving terms greater than 20 years, and 10 people are serving life in prison, with African Americans making up over 78% of all those imprisoned for pot possession, according to Marjorie Essman, director of the Louisiana ACLU, as she told the committee. Despite these facts, lawmakers seemed only interested in discussing the possibility of medical marijuana legislation, hearing from Atasha King, who plans to move to Colorado to access high CBD oil for her daughter's epilepsy. One district attorney testifying explained, quote, "You have to conclude that marijuana, that THC, has some very bad characteristics. We do not need in Louisiana our workforce to be impaired any further," end quote. The only plan to address the criminalization of adult recreational use comes from State Representative Austin Baden, a Democrat who is again sponsoring a bill to reduce penalties for those arrested and convicted of marijuana crimes. And finally, former Denver Broncos receiver Nate Jackson told HBO's Real Sports that, quote, "Weed is the least harmful and least addictive of the painkillers players use to cope with the violent demands of the game, and no one ever overdoses from weed. The problem is pills and booze. A joint can alleviate the need for either," end quote. We will bring you more coverage of the growing realization of how medical marijuana can help the NFL in our Hour 2. This has been your 420 Radio News for Wednesday, January 22nd, 2014. I'm Russ Belville. You can get the transcripts of 420 Radio News exclusively at the National Cannabis Coalition. Visit ncc420.com for more details. When we come back, we'll go behind the headlines and take a look at the recent quote by Governor Chris Christie about ending the war on drugs. You're listening to The Russ Belville Show on 420radio.org. We'll be right back.